I'm interested in a lot of different things, honestly. The biochemistry, right? The computational work, the data science, the pharmaceuticals, all that kind of thing is my sort of my passion. But I'm interested in learning new things, honestly. And as sort of cliche as that sounds, that's kind of what took me to grad school, and that's what got me here, right? If I'm not learning new things, kind of in the technical space, I'm just kind of bored.
Hello and welcome to the Dumb It Down podcast, breaking down the disconnect between school and work for engineers. Today, I'm joined by my good friend Curtis Martin, who grew up in the Charlotte area and went to high school down the street from me. He grew up in a military family, or at least his dad was in the military, and his older brother paved the way for him to do engineering at NC State. Curtis ended up doing chemical engineering, and just because of the sheer desire to want to learn more, he ended up doing his doctorate at Purdue University and studied some things like cancer research and enzymes and biochemistry. So now he's in the pharmaceutical industry in Washington, D.C. All of that and more because he played high school and college football. So tune in to hear a little bit more about Curtis. I learned a lot from him about the PhD track, and hopefully you do too. Hello and welcome to the Dumb It Down podcast. I'm your host, Eric Larson, and we're here to break down the disconnect between school and work. It is the Dumb It Down podcast, not the DID podcast, not the DID podcast, no
Not
three-letter
yet.
acronyms, as suggested by my guest, Curtis Martin. Curtis, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Name is Curtis Martin. Been a friend of Eric for a good while now. I guess since undergrad. How deep do you want me to go? I mean, do you want me to just start talking about where I'm from and go from there?
Yeah,
All right.
personal background.
Yeah. So I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent I guess at this point I still have spent most of my life there. But moved around a decent amount. Family is a military family. Dad was in the Air Force and retired as a colonel in the Air Force. And so we didn't necessarily move around as much as you might think from the stereotypical sort of, military family, but we did move around, especially towards my, end of high school. Went to high school and actually even middle school with some of the folks that have been on your podcast already. Check the earlier episodes.
Shout out to Vlad and Evan.
Yeah, you like that. So went to South Neck with them, and then went to NC State as well with them, and been all over the place since then. So Raleigh to Indiana, and now in Washington D.C.
There we go. Yeah, Curtis is well-traveled now, like a lot of the college crew. So yeah, a little background on Curtis and I. So Curtis went to high school in Charlotte, but we kind of met through this whole group of friends freshman year of college. We all ended up being engineers, which just kind of happenstance, I guess, or maybe like attracts like. But yeah, Curtis roomed with Vlad on like the 8th floor of our freshman dorm, and we just did a lot of stupid stuff back in the day. Some good, clean, old-fashioned fun. And yeah, got to know each other a little bit. And now over the years have visited out in the Midwest and East Coast and all over. So
That's true.
Is there any, go ahead.
You've seen me in all my locations, it seems like. So yeah, no, that's you kind of followed me out to the Midwest a little bit.
I did.
Got to see you in Chicago, and you got to come to the metropolis of West Lafayette. So yeah, great stuff.
That's true. Yeah, just got to knock DC off the list. I had a trip planned and literally got COVID that week, which is fun.
Yeah, that happens. And I actually forgot that you were in the same dorm, because that freshman dorm, man, that was that was something else. I kind of blacked out that dorm out of my memory. So
yeah, freshman year, Curtis was on the football team, so I guess maybe we didn't see as much of each other. But I remember you would get pizzas, and we would always be happy because late night food when you're a bunch of freshman dudes is pretty important.
Yeah, it's funny how many people remember that about my freshman year, actually, which is I mean, so I did play football, right? I mean, I was on the team anyway. I didn't start or anything. I was a bench warmer for sure. Was a recruited walk on, but as part of that, I played offensive lineman, as you know, but I was severely underweight for an offensive lineman, not for a general human being.
Right.
And so yeah, I mean, they were always feeding me extra. I mean, everybody got snacks, to go home, but they'd occasionally dish out a full pizza for me and give me a second one to take home. And it's like, how do I eat all this? Which is a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless. So
That's crazy.
good time.
Yeah, yeah. They asked you to put on a ton of weight on top of already being a big dude freshman year, and you were kind of like, well,
Yeah,
no thanks. I'm going to do something else.
they did. I mean, like I said, I've never been underweight by any means, but just given the nature of the beast in a D1 school like that, playing offensive lineman nonetheless, right? I mean, I've never naturally weighed over 240, 250, and they wanted me up to 270, 80, which never happened, because I mean, practice was you kind of got there at 5 or 6 depending on what was going on, and you didn't leave till 11 or 12. So no matter how much they fed me, I ended up losing weight, and at the end of the season, I was an offensive lineman, again sitting the bench, but I was an offensive lineman weighing 235. So kind
At
of
a
a kind of strange feeling.
at a D1 ACC school, yeah, I'm sure they were trying to do that. But yeah, well, that's obviously very exciting, and I'm a big football fan, so Curtis and I have always talked football. But we may be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so we'll back up a little bit and go back to high school, Curtis, when he was running around with Vlad, episode 2, and Evan, episode 3. Humble or a shameless plug. And we're probably thinking about engineering at the time. When you were maybe a senior, or what brought you to engineering and what made you kind of go that direction?
I have, in terms of deciding to go chemical engineering, did my undergrad degree in chemical engineering. I have a very similar story as to a lot of chemical engineers, which is to say, loved chemistry, loved math, and that's the natural fit. If you
That's
ask,
it.
yeah, no, it really is. I mean, if you ask, 95% of the chemical engineers that go through school, that's what you're going to get. Because to be honest, and at least where we went to school, there wasn't really a good understanding of what chemical engineering was, right? I mean, when you think engineering in your head, just broadly engineering, right? You tend to think one of two things probably, which is either civil, I build the roads, I build the bridges, right? I build the buildings, or you think
Sure.
mechanical, I tinker with things, like I build engines, I fix things, right? Um, and so chemical engineering doesn't, and a lot of the other types of engineering out there don't, at least in my experience, don't really get a whole lot of attention. And I don't know that there's anything, I don't know that that's intentional, right? I mean, you have to have a chemical engineer teaching at a high school to kind of get that insider knowledge, right?
Right.
But that's how I think that's how a lot of us end up in chemical engineering is we're good at chemistry, we're good at math, or we like them, and chemical engineering is a natural fit. So yeah.
Well, a big part of that is the teacher, I would think. Like the only reason you'd like chemistry in high school is if you liked the class, which typically means you liked the teacher, no?
Yeah, sure. But I did. I mean, Vlad and I and Evan, we had a fantastic chemistry teacher in high school, AP chemistry, Mr. Aram, which
I've heard of
might,
him.
yeah, I was about to say, it might not be the first time you've actually heard of him. Yeah, no, he was great, and I had great calculus teachers, Mr. Rakowski and Mr. Bacon. I had a lot of good teachers, and yeah, I mean, I can't say that doesn't have anything to do with it, right? But I had a lot of good teachers in a lot of other types of classes and disciplines that I didn't really gravitate towards, so without a doubt. But I don't know. I mean, I like to think that in high school I had some forward thinking, at least enough to know that when I went to college, I wanted to get a degree that would get me a well-paying job after I left. Right?
Okay.
And
Yes,
you know,
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I mean and with engineering, I mean that's kind of it's a good route to go.
Sure. Okay. So you made the decision in high school for chemical engineering instead of engineering undeclared. Did you kind of know that going in?
Yeah, I did. And like I said, I mean, I've had good teachers in a lot of different spaces and all throughout my life. But like I said, chemistry and math really were the two things that I gravitated towards. Um, there were, it turns out there is another subject in science that I didn't realize I would gravitate towards till later. Um, but
Oh,
in high school, I just didn't know because I didn't take the class.
okay. Well, I might cut this out, but just so I know, what is that subject?
Biology.
Okay, okay. Well, we can touch on that too. So you're a high school senior thinking chemical engineering, probably applied to multiple schools, and I'm assuming NC State was the choice because of in-state tuition. Is there any other factors?
Yeah, no, that's really it. I mean, engineering school in state. I actually did have so at the time, like I said, my dad. That's when about right before senior year was actually when he moved. He had to move to for his own career purposes, and he moved down to Warner Robins, Georgia, which is a massive Air Force base down there. And so because of him being down there, I actually did have the opportunity to go to Georgia Tech.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I did apply there. And if I'm being honest, so at the time the Georgia Tech was running the double wing, right, the triple option, like my high school was. So there was a good chance I'd fit in for football. It's also a fantastic engineering school, so it was actually going to be a hard decision. Luckily, they made it for me. They didn't reject me, but they did put me on the wait list like 3 times. And so by the time I got that third letter saying, "Hey, we're going to put you on the wait list," I was like, you know what, it's not meant to be. I'm going to go to state. Let's do this thing.
Academics plus football?
No. It was not. It was not like that, right? Not scholarship, but I knew I was going to be walking on slash recruited walk on anywhere I went, right?
Okay, okay.
So between NC State, which at the time was a little bit more traditional, versus the Georgia Tech's triple option, which I guess you can argue is more traditional depending on how you want to look at it.
Sure.
Um, it would have been a natural fit for me, right? I feel like I could have convinced somebody to let me on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, for the non-football listeners, triple option is like a super old school running attack that I guess is more popular at a high school level, is very unpopular at a college level, and Georgia Tech clings onto it for some reason. So I hadn't even thought about that factoring into your decision.
Yeah,
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah. Well, and I mean, athletics were important to me, and they remain important to me, but they were never the driver in the decision, right? Because I knew that while I might be good enough to be on a college team, the next level is NFL, right? And that's just I knew that was not in the cards. So that was
Hmm.
something that I was very interested in. I wanted to continue, but it was not the primary, factor.
Sure, you had enough foresight to assume you wouldn't make the NFL.
True.
Too bad.
Too
There'd be a lot
bad.
more listeners to the podcast if you did.
Well, you know what, Eric? This is about you, so I am sorry for that.
Right. Yeah. All about me. No, that's all good background. So we will carry ahead. Curtis becomes a freshman juggling chemi and football, which is well, I guess it's still undergrad classes, but still, there's a lot on your plate. We talked a little bit earlier about how you didn't want to do all that was required to stay on the football team, so focused on engineering, matriculated into chemical. Did you have any internships or other things during college that kind of piqued an interest for you, or what did you do kind of outside of classes?
Yeah, I had after freshman year, I had we could call it an internship, right? But what really happened was one of the men that used to work for my father, for my dad, he was starting up a business that just happened to be chemical engineering related.
Hmm.
Um, and so he agreed nicely to take me on for the summer, let me learn, let me more or less hang out. And, if I'm being completely honest, I mean, like you said, in chemical engineering, this is not unique to chemical engineering, but, you don't have your first chemical engineering class till you're a sophomore, right? So most of what I did that summer was honestly manual labor, frankly, which I'm not complaining
Okay.
about. I mean, it was great. It was great to be there. I got my that's kind of where I got my first true paycheck.
Okay. One man shop. He just started his own thing.
Yeah. I mean, it was him, and so by the time I had gotten there, he had an assistant, and he had actually hired one chemical engineer, formerly from NC State, that was helping him actually because he himself was not a chemical engineer. He just had this idea that he was trying to bring to the fore. So
Okay.
yeah, so it was the four of us in a small town, North Carolina, just trying to a make the thing work better and b get funding for it, get somebody to pay for it, get somebody to buy it.
Yeah, that's a like a business application that you're learning after freshman year, which is probably pretty good time to learn that kind of thing. And Curtis eventually went kind of a research route and kind of has explored both. I've talked with a couple of people, and a lot of people have just initially gone, okay, I'm not really an engineer. I just want this degree and to get to the business world. I feel like Curtis is my first guest who is more on the research engineering side. Granted, you've dabbled in business too, so we'll talk about that. But so that was after freshman year. And how about after sophomore, junior year? Anything kind of like that?
Yeah, so um, fairly early on at NC State, I knew that I wanted to go to grad school. Um,
Why is that?
there's two reasons actually, and I don't know what sort of weight to attribute to each. One of them is sheer competitiveness with my brother. Um, my brother went and got his master's, and I just couldn't let him get ahead of me, right?
Georgia
Um,
Tech?
Georgia Tech, Georgia
His
Tech,
undergrad was state.
undergrad NC State. He did his fifth year while we were freshmen, and so he went to Georgia Tech after that for I think maybe a year and a half, a year to 2 years at Georgia Tech to get his master's.
Okay.
So that's part of it. The other part was that you were speaking of being sort of the science guy, was that I just kind of when I took my classes I just kind of found myself wanting to know more. I found that there was too many times in my undergrad chemical engineering classes, and chemistry classes, that I sat there thinking this doesn't necessarily make sense. And what you find is as you go, deeper into a discipline, is that a lot of the stuff they teach you to start, if you really drill into it, maybe doesn't quite make sense, or maybe it's not that it doesn't make sense, it's just that it's empirical, but they don't tell you that it's empirical. Um, and the reason they do that is because in order to fully understand either the physics or the chemistry or the whatever behind it, you have to take other classes, right? And so
Hmm.
particularly in chemical engineering, although I think this is probably true across all the engineering fields, um, the focus for undergraduate education is application, right? If I've got, if I've got a distillation column, right, what sort of energy do I need to input? And it doesn't matter necessarily why that amount of energy, makes, makes the different shelves in the distillation column, different temperatures. It just matters that if you pick one, or if you have one that you want to get to, you know how to get it to work. And so I just found myself, often asking the questions of why, and found myself dissatisfied by what we were taught at the undergrad level. And that was true also because you mentioned I stopped playing football, but when I stopped playing football, I got so much time back in my day, and that's
Hmm.
when I decided to add that chemistry degree as well, and the math minor, right? And so I mean, all of these things kind of came together, right, to sort of, I mean, it was just something I knew based on just the intellectual curiosity, honestly. um,
Yeah.
that I wanted to continue.
Interesting. That is, yes, that's a very different answer than I've heard so far, which is exactly why I wanted to talk to you. But right, just wanting to learn more. So in your coursework, I'll share what I did and compare it to that. I studied for the test. I did not read my textbook through to learn. I read parts of my textbook to get answers to the tests right. And that was always like, my goal. Would you say you took a different approach?
I would say yes, although not exclusively, right? I mean, it's very class dependent, and it was very much upon, based on interest, right? So a combination of interest and, where I was headed, right? So, I mean, there were some classes where, that I really didn't, I kind of did what you said, right? Which is, I just got to take this class, and I'm not really that interested, but it is what it is, and so I will kind of learn for the test. And for example, physics, 201, or whatever the second physics class, E&M, right, electromagnetism. Um,
208.
208, 208. There you go. Physics
I don't know why
208.
I remember that.
I don't either. Physics 208 was like that, and it's something that I actually wish, I kind of regret, honestly, looking back. But you know, it, so my answer to you is to say yes, absolutely, but not exclusively, right? There were classes like that,
Okay.
especially especially the classes you kind of have to take, like the social sciences or whatever, the writing
Sure.
classes, the English classes, eh. But when it came to the core classes, right? When it came to transport phenomena, when it came to organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry, when it came to sort of biochemical engineering, these sorts of things, thermodynamics. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just found it interesting, and I also found that in my experience, learning is learning, and if you do it the way I did for those classes, you end up doing well on the test as well. So most of the time.
Yeah. Hey, that's how it should be. Yeah, okay. Well, you just rattled off a bunch of the most difficult courses that college can offer and wanted to learn more. So, hey, I'm here for it. So okay, so you decided graduate degree, learn more, compete with your brother, and that was pretty official sophomore or junior year, and then you were on that track. You picked up a chemistry major and a math minor, all supporting this kind of graduate direction. Just a little bit on how you got to the grad degree.
So I did the graduate degree was kind of decided fairly early on. The type of graduate degree was not. Um,
Okay.
like I said, the competitiveness in me wanted to at least get a master's. Um, but if I'm being honest, I mean, the reason why it wasn't decided early on is because I didn't understand what the difference was between the two, right? Like I didn't understand what the options were, like what does it mean to get your master's, what does it mean to get your
Mhm.
PhD, um,
Yeah, I still
and
don't.
so after, like I said, my freshman year, I did that internship. Um,
Hmm.
but the summer after that, I started working. Actually, the year after that, not even the summer, it was the following January. I started in a research lab as a sophomore. Sophomore, I took my first chemical engineering class, and I volunteered to be an undergrad researcher in a bio nanotechnology lab. And that's exactly what I did when I got in there. I was like, "Yep, I'm gonna do it, but I have no idea what I'm doing. Please do
How am I here?
please do not make me actually do anything. I have no idea what's going on. It sounded cool. You asked for volunteers. Here I am. Um,
Unpaid.
oh yeah, unpaid. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
I mean, you don't get paid as an undergrad researcher most of the time. There
Yeah.
are
I worked at
instances.
Chili's that summer,
Nice.
making the
Well,
big bucks.
yeah, no, I mean, I remember you working at Chili's. You made bigger bucks than I made, that's for sure.
Apparently.
Um, but yeah, so that was my first true experience in research, and then I kind of had experiences like that, for the rest of my time at NC State, and like I said, understanding the difference between the master's and the PhD was ultimately what made me realize what I wanted to do, right? Where I wanted to go.
And when was that? Not like concrete.
Yeah, junior year, right? Because I mean, you kind of start looking for schools and applying to different places and trying to figure out where you want to go and doing the research.
Okay.
Junior year ish. I had one professor at NC State, Professor Hall, who was very helpful in helping me understand, what I wanted or what I was looking for, right, and what the difference was,
Okay.
and why the PhD was kind of what I was aiming towards. And so she was very helpful in that regard.
And if you could boil that down into like a sentence or two, what does the PhD offer you that a master's does not?
So I'll speak for sort of STEM fields here. I don't know
Okay.
how it is with others, and it also even within STEM fields, right? There is sort of a distinction here because I'm just sort of caveating before I give my opinion, which is to say that like in chemical engineering, for example, a lot of people don't even get masters. They go, if you get your PhD, I didn't even get a master's. I went straight for the PhD, and in a lot of disciplines, that's not even a thing. In a lot of disciplines, you have to get your master's on the way to your PhD, and the master's is sort of a proving ground almost, right? And it depends
Okay.
too, because you can do a master's with a research with a thesis, right, which is sort of what I was just talking about. But you can also do a master's that's really, there's not a thesis involved, there's not a research project involved, but there is just extra courses that you learn more, right? So in chemical engineering anyway, that's one of the primary differences. It's, the PhD is designed for you to drill down into a specific research problem. The difference is you are in a master's, you are learning more information, you are learning new knowledge. In a PhD, you are starting the process of actually creating knowledge, right? So you are no longer reading textbooks to solve a problem. You are solving a problem that hasn't necessarily been solved before, and you are actually creating information that, if you're good anyway, will go into a textbook maybe one day, right? But
Yeah.
in my mind, that's the distinction. It's learning knowledge versus creating it.
Well, that's very well put. And given those two options, it sounds way more cool to create knowledge than to read more from a textbook. So I could see why you went that direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so, which is why I went that direction, right? But like, it's not for everybody, by any means, and just because you also don't get a PhD doesn't mean you're not capable of it. I mean, I'm confident, like all of our friend group, everybody, a lot of people that I know that didn't get PhDs could. It's just a matter of interest, right, and a matter of
Hmm.
desire because it's sort of a slog, right? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I obviously found it the more interesting path to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, the want to learn more. I think Vlad's story is interesting to me because we had a similar approach to undergrad where it was like, okay, do well in the tests, have a vibrant social life, and get a job. And then to like allow him to do the whole Germany thing, he was like, oh, I'll just get another engineering degree. Turns out it was way more difficult and a way different way for him to learn.
Mm.
But I didn't have that drive or desire. I wanted to, I guess, get paid. I was just sick of coursework. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I can. Hey,
um,
look, I can definitely sympathize with that, and I wouldn't I wouldn't call myself, in undergrad a hermit or anything, but my social life certainly wasn't as vibrant as some. So I paid for it in some sense, um, but yeah, I mean, I can definitely sympathize with that.
sure, sure. Well, and for chemical engineering too, you kind of made the distinction between master's and doctorate. I'm not totally positive if that distinction goes in a lot of other fields, but we're talking about chemie today, so. Yeah, that's good. That's good background. So now junior year, I know senior year, first semester, everyone starts applying to jobs. That's the same with the master's, I'm assuming, and maybe you found out midway through your first semester, or when did you find out and apply, and how did that go?
I'm trying to think of that timeline actually. So I think you sort of apply your first semester of senior year, if I'm correct,
Okay.
and then you sort of hear by the end of either that first semester, so in the fall semester, or maybe early of the second semester of spring semester, senior year. But the whole point here is that you don't really know till about a semester out, that where you're going to go.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I mean, I did summer after junior year, I did a what's called a research experience for undergraduates, which is actually one of those experiences you do get paid for. But that's because
Hey.
it's sort of a federally funded initiative to get undergrads involved and interested in research, and it also takes them off normally to other universities. And so
Cool.
that took me to the Colorado School of Mines, for example, that summer.
I
And
forgot
so
about that.
yeah, so that helped me as well in this. But I remember, I guess where I'm going with this is I remember being there though and thinking and already thinking about where I'm wanting to go and researching schools and figuring out like what might be good for me. And I wasn't applying yet, but I was already putting that plan in place to say, which of these fits me and where do I think I can get in, honestly.
Now, is any of this topic related, like what you wanted to pursue a doctorate in, or is it more just looking at the schools themselves?
No, it's a good question. It's definitely both, and it's in my experience so far, it, it's very dependent upon the person. So there's a couple people, for example, I know that went to grad school because they already knew exactly what they wanted to do, like research discipline, research topic, problem, and everything. That's
Okay.
a very small minority, but it does exist.
I would imagine.
Yeah. The rest of us, I would say, kind of have a feel for what sub-discipline we want to get into, but not necessarily the specifics, right? Like we know that we want to go to grad school, we know that we want to get the PhD, we know that we want to do something, in this subfield.
Create knowledge.
There you go. It sounds much more pretentious when you say it.
In that voice, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, most of us don't know exactly what we want to do. So there's a combination of that and also the people, which you don't really understand. But so like when I applied to grad school, for example, what I tried to do is because when at that point I knew I wanted to get sort of into biochemical engineering, biochemical space, something along those lines. And so what I tried to do was find chemical engineering programs that had more than one professor doing that, right? That had options when you got there, because
Hmm.
in general you don't necessarily know who you're going to work with until you get there and you're a semester in, and then there's this sort of speed dating process, right? That connects you with that person. So that's how I tried to do it. A combination of sort of what type of research was being done there, what I was interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, so backing up a little, how'd you come to biochem then?
That honestly, that was just a product of the classes I took, what I found interesting. I took a handful of different different classes. Right, chemical engineering is actually fairly broad. Chemistry fairly broad actually, and so there's biochemistry, right? There's biochemical
That's a
engineering.
required course for
It
one of those programs.
it's a technical elective that has to be filled, but you don't have to take biochem,
Okay.
right? You could take another one. But it was just one of those things that I kind of stumbled upon, I think. And when I started learning about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's hitting the
Cool.
spot, right? Um, yeah, I mean that's just happenstance, honestly.
Yeah, just kind of a feel, and then it's like when you see it, you know it kind of thing.
Hmm.
So that worked well. Hopefully, it was a good teacher too. And then that preceded your doctorate search, and you landed on Purdue eventually because they had multiple teachers doing that kind of stuff, it sounds like.
Hmm.
You got accepted, moved out there after senior year, and did 4 years there. Just a little bit on how that experience went, what you were learning.
It was just so obviously more difficult than anything I had done in undergrad, which was awesome because that's what I was looking for, right? But it really, I mean, it was I learned a lot, right? Um, And then as I started transitioning into full time research, I mean, it was just it was again, it's a very different experience, right? I mean, it's one thing to do sort of research on the side. You don't have that much time, right? You're doing what you can, but you don't have, like I said, you don't have that much time. You got other things to do, to being sort of a full time researcher. And the sort of stereotypical grad school experience as well is not, it's not a 40-hour week, right? It's you don't really come home and you're done. You come home, you have dinner, and you do something else that you can do. And for me, I have always preferred being busy. So like it was good, but not all my weeks were like that. So like I didn't. It was just a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
A lot of personal growth, a lot of professional growth, a lot of intellectual growth. I mean, it was just an overall incredible learning experience, honestly.
Yeah. So you were pretty focused on that topic. You did a lot of research or learning in your first 2 years, and then you ended up working on some projects, I'm assuming, that kind of interested you. And then by the end, you had this proven thesis and a big, 500-page essay, or what's like the end of that even look like?
Yeah, so that's about right. Um,
Hey,
generally, depending on the lab, you get yourself on a primary project, and you sort of help out the lab people, the people that are working with you, the other graduate students, the postdocs, right? Um, and so you work towards a goal, right? In my case, despite the podcast being called Dumb It Down, my work was on essentially creating machine learning models for developing selective kinase inhibitors, right?
selective what inhibitors?
Kinase inhibitors. It's an enzyme in your body that's responsible for phosphorylation, which is a signaling mechanism. And so
Okay.
all that's to say is just that it was a cancer therapy application, right?
Okay.
And so my job was to help move that bill forward. And along the way, what you end up doing is depending on the situation, but most cases you end up publishing papers, right, in academic journals with your findings, with your results, with your sometimes non-results if they'll take it, that kind of thing. Um, and at the end of it all, depending on, again, professor to professor, group to group, you write your dissertation, which is a very long document that sort of provides well, not a summary. It provides a very detailed, um, you know, picture of all the things you did in grad school. Um, and so, some people, like some groups, Meredith's group, my wife's group, who you could also interview for this.
I want to, yeah.
She, in her group, the papers were the primary thing, right? And so what they ended up doing for their dissertation is they just kind of compressed the papers together, and that was the dissertation. For me, I had a different situation because of sort of the content of the work we were doing, and so I actually had to write a separate document, which is a lot of work.
A lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of dedication, and hopefully a lot of payoff too. I mean, it sounds like you're happy you went the route you did, learned a ton, created some knowledge, and eventually launched into a career. So I guess the two tracks after your doctorate is work for a university or work for a company, I would think. And you did a little bit of both.
Yeah, so I stayed on as a non-tenure track professor for about 18 months.
Say that again?
A non-tenure track professor. Um,
Okay.
Most of the professors that you think of are tenure track professors, but there are other ones that are called non-tenure track. They don't have the same benefits, but they don't work towards the same thing, right? They don't necessarily do the research and the research primarily in the teaching, that sort of thing. They normally have a much more narrow goal and purpose. Yeah, and so I did that. I did that a bit for, like I said, for about 18 months, and that was primarily education, honestly, which is another thing that I found in grad school that I really enjoyed.
All right. Well, yes, a long and winding journey. And now you're at a current job. Well, you got the job what, 2 years ago now?
Almost, yeah,
Okay.
almost.
and you were looking for, like, what were you looking for at that point? How'd you come into the job, and what have you thought of it?
So I currently work for the Center for Naval Analyses, which is a federally funded research and development center for the Navy, the Department of the Navy. And so all that means,
CNA.
CNA, yep. And all that means is that, the Navy, in the budget for the Navy is allocated money for us to do research on things that the Navy thinks is important. So, but to back up, to answer your actual question, um, it actually, to be honest, it came down to location. Um, when Meredith graduated, she got a fellowship, which is a sort of a science policy type of fellowship that brought her to Washington D.C. And and I wanted to be with her. I mean, we didn't want to continue to be living apart. Um, that
Fair enough.
that gets old, and so there's a lot of location, right? And my initial my initial ideas, right, were to go into pharma. That's kind of where my degree positioned me, which is pharmaceutical research, drug discovery, right? Um,
Biochem to pharma, drug discovery, all makes sense, I think.
yeah, right. So I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot to digest there, right? But I mean, the cancer therapy work that I was doing, right?
That's true. Okay.
That's fundamentally biochemistry, right? But the applications I was using were machine learning, data science, right? Um, and so that's where all of the goals for me in grad school were sort of towards pharma, right? And that's where I was directed. And there are some pharma companies, in the DC area, but I applied and just wasn't hearing anything, honestly.
Hmm.
And so you kind of go through that process. Your wife is already moved here, and we're paying DC rent plus. Um,
Yeah.
and so you start thinking, all right, what are the other things I can do, right? And like I said, for me, data science was one of those, and that was something that it's in kind of a hot field right now. And I thought I'd take a chance, right? And so I found CNA online and applied like I did many other places. And of course, the connection with the military and my family was important as well. I mean, this is not quite serving, but it's a sort of in a capacity that I can help, right? Contributing to the nation's defense, right?
Hmm.
And it's not just my dad that's been in the military. It's like grandpa, uncles, everybody, right?
Yeah.
So
Cool.
I applied to them, and they interviewed me and gave me an offer, and I've been here for the last, like I said, almost 2 years.
Right. Some social reasons, some personal, professional reasons. I mean, it's all related. That's kind of what I want to show with this podcast too. Even if you have this super interest in biochemistry, which turns into pharma, plus data science and math, and like all of this, you can still be sitting there like applying for jobs. Like, what the heck? I'm trying to hear back.
Yeah,
And then, DC, you wanted to be there for a reason, made it happen, and learned a lot. However, are also in the midst of a job transition to get back to what you really want to do, correct?
yeah, that's right. When it comes down to it, and just like with my decision to go to grad school, right? The discipline itself, data science, it doesn't interest me the same way that the biochemistry does, that the pharmaceuticals does, that the other things that I sort of trained for in my PhD do. So I'm actually going to be taking a postdoctoral researcher position at the National Cancer Institute within NIH. So we're going to be going kind of full circle almost back to pharma research, and doing a lot of things that actually doing something almost completely separate, going from computational research in grad school to more experimental anyway, more wet lab research. But yeah, kind of going back to the things that really brought me to grad school in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, that's That's super cool, and I could ask 100 more questions about how the heck that works, but I don't know that we can drill down that much this time. Maybe another time. But man, yeah, cancer research and yeah, having that interest. Some of the segments I've done is like how did I get into smart buildings? How did Evan get interested in sustainability? Things like that. It's like how did Curtis get interested in a combination of things. When you boil it down, it's the interest in biochem supported by analysis through data science, which led to pharma.
I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm still learning in my head how those all fit together. But yeah, well, I followed at least. So cool. Yeah, I guess is there anything I missed there? Is that what you would say? How you got down this path?
I mean, yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that, I tell this to, you know, all the bosses or potential bosses that have asked me what I want to do, which is to say I'm interested in a lot of different things, honestly. You're right, the biochemistry, right, the computational stuff, the computational work, the data science, the pharmaceuticals, all that kind of thing is my sort of my passion. But I'm interested in learning new things, honestly. And as sort of cliche as that sounds, that's kind of what took me to grad school, and that's what got me here, right? If I'm not learning new things, kind of in the technical space, I'm just kind of bored, honestly.
Well, it doesn't get more cutting edge than cancer research. I think that's pretty relevant these days. So, yeah, excited for the new role for you. Switch it up. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it, and maybe we'll check in a year or so.
I appreciate that, and I'd be delighted.
Here we go. We can try to dumb down these very very smart topics. But cool. Well, I've got a couple questions for you. General things I tack on to the end of the interview. So, for the questions, it's my favorite one. What's been your biggest screw up?
So I'm going to call it my biggest screw up because it's a constant problem. It's not that it's been a single instance that's necessarily killed me here. It's taking on too many things at once, honestly.
Hmm.
I've done it at my current job where the structure at CNA, or at least within the data science division that I work, is very lateral. People are project directors and also analysts, and for other people's projects, and so there's a lot of mixing and matching. And so what happens is that a new project will start. The project director for it will come to you, say, hey, can you do this? Yep, sure, sounds good, I'll be there. And you get yourself into 5, 6, 7 different projects and start realizing, oh crap, what am I doing? Um, I just don't have the time for it. And so it's something that I'm trying, I perpetually try to work on, but it's been happening since grad school, right? It's been happening in undergrad, and it's just it's sort of like I said, it's a big screw up in the sense of you're not really doing yourself a service by taking on more things, because then you can, obviously it's just math, right? You can only contribute less to each, and you do a poorer job, and that doesn't reflect well. So um, my biggest screw up is just not figuring out how to say no when it comes to professional development, I guess, and professional work.
Very interesting. Yeah, you want to learn too much.
Sure.
Curtis figured out that answer while answering two other questions. So multitasking, always on. That's pretty impressive. The question is the favorite class or project you've worked on, or the ideal class or project to work on.
I don't know. Let's pull something from CNA since we're here.
Cool.
I've been putting together a sort of a simulation for one of my projects that has been very new and very different to me. It's much more probabilistic than stochastic is what they'll call it, than I've normally done. I've normally stayed along the sort of machine learning modeling side, and this has been very much sort of mechanistic um, model that I had to learn a lot to put together, and it's been sort of my baby, over the last like 9 months or so, putting it together and actually making it work the way making it model the way the Navy actually operates, has been a very interesting and yeah, I've just learned a lot doing it. So that kind of thing is ideal for me, and it's been a great project, which is not
Any
even
sort
in
of
the
learning.
it's not even in the pharma world.
True. So machine learning is training an algorithm, and you're saying mechanistic is like doing all of that programming yourself?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I think that's enough, like in a nutshell, right? Like yeah, right.
Yeah.
The difference in the mechanistic model, I guess, just briefly, would just be that instead of just sort of putting things into an algorithm and seeing what happens, and tailoring it, tinkering with it, you're more sort of explicitly saying, here's how I think the world works. I'm going to model it
Ah.
accordingly based on that, and based on data that I can use that represents each point, each aspect of that world.
Hmm. So I guess there's bias in algorithms either way, but
Nice.
that's pretty interesting. Curtis gets to say how the world works. There you go.
Yeah, very limited sense, and even then is wrong, right? As they say, right? All models are wrong, but some are useful. So
Okay, I haven't heard that one. That's good. All right, two more. So, do you have a mentor or have had a couple mentors, people you aspire to? If so, what are they doing that you are not?
but I am not. Well, I mean, some of my mentors, I have had a couple. I've got one in my current job, and I consider my advisor or my professor, for my PhD, an obvious mentor. And um,
Cool.
I try to model what I'm doing in their footsteps. And one of the things that I always appreciated about my graduate professor, my advisor, was that he's kind of a journeyman. He started out as a professor, but then he went into the pharmaceuticals, drug discovery companies, right? He spent some time at NSF, National Science Foundation, doing some work. Started a business, right, and then eventually came back to academia. So that's something that I'm trying to do, but that just takes time, I think.
Yeah, that's that's solid. Good answer. Last thing, is there anything you want to promote? And are you open to being a mentor for others?
Nothing I want to promote, but I'm absolutely open to being a mentor for others. If you think, if you or whoever else is out there that thinks I can be helpful to them, I'm more than happy to.
There we go. If you're struggling with your doctorate research topic and have a dissertation coming up and just want to run it by Curtis over a nice, 3 hour webcam session, he's your guy.
I'm here for you.
There we go. I hope it doesn't come to that. But no, I appreciate it. I think it's nice to hear about people's mentors. I think teachers a lot of times come up, bosses a lot of times come up. And yeah, it's good to have this track as well, as opposed to all of my salespeople just willing to run their mouths about technical sales and stuff. So thank you, Curtis. It's been fun. It's good to catch up. And we will talk again soon.
Oh, thanks, Eric. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to reach the masses with this podcast. I'm excited.
Yeah, my mom, my dad, and the 7 other people.
Sure. Thanks, Eric.